What is the most superhuman thing you have ever seen anyone do? I work in a major trauma hospital in London, and we once had this young boy arrive in the middle of the night whose arm, from the elbow down, had been completely sliced off by a machete. The policeman arrived a few minutes later looking as white as a sheet, holding a bag with the arm inside. This boy's knocking at death's door. The arm has a tourniquet on, but he has lost so much blood that even after 16 units, the highest we could get his blood pressure was around 87 systolic. Within about 5 minutes of being inside our department, the boy gets rushed off to theater, and when we turn the corner all of a sudden we see the trauma surgeon running along the theater floor. His sterile gown flying behind him looks like a goddamn cape, and it's like something out of a freaking movie. I wasn't present for the surgery, but I know he did it. He spent about 15 hours, but he reattached all the vessels, the ligaments and everything that needed to be done for that arm. I think after a few months it was pretty much fully functional again. Might seem pretty non-superhero, but to me, he is a superhuman. There used to be this old black guy living near me in Philly. Every day he'd do the craziest bull, and he was in his 60s. First every day, rain, shine, or snow, he put on a pair of short shorts and sandals at 5 AM and went for a 12 to 20 mile run. He'd get back at 8ish. If he did 12 miles he then went for a swim at the Y. That was just the everyday. But I've seen him do crazy bull, like he got locked out of his apartment building, so he very quickly scaled up 3 stories to his window. I saw him do a standing jump into a trash can for a $5 bet. He was seen everywhere, because on top of running he liked to walk. We lived in North Philly and I'll never forget my surprise seeing him in Kinpottstown. Apparently, his brother was visiting a friend and he wanted to see him, so the crazy walked/ran 45 miles. Down on the riverfront he liked to fish. After a storm part of a wall eroded and collapsed and dropped large stones onto his favorite spot, each probably about 100 lbs. And he was there tossing them out of the way. He loudly exclaimed, "Who, I'm thirsty," one day at our nearby park, while filling up a gallon jug from the spigot. He said it loud enough that a good number of people looked at him just in time to see him take the gallon and chug every last drop right there. Then he refilled and said something like, "This gonna be for later." He also would do pull-ups on monkey bars and just not stop, like he could just go for as long as he felt like. In addition, he regularly did flag poles and could hold it for about 2 minutes. He got shot 3 times during a mugging in the chest and walked to a hospital 4 miles away because Frankfurt General is, which was down 3 blocks from where he was shot getting off the L. Finally, he ate huge meals. I'm talking like comical quantities of food. He would dumpster dive things like Dunkin' Donuts or Pizza Hut or Philadelphia Pretzel Factory to get literal trash bags of food that he'd sit on his porch and eat. I remember watching or as he ate a 5-gallon bucket of watermelon slices, and another time he just ate bagels one after another. It was like 5 bags of Thems. He wasn't a big dude and you could just watch his stomach expand like a balloon. Then there was the time with the war milks. A war milk truck broke down on our block and lost power in the 105 heat. The driver was taking the milk out of the truck and asked if anyone wanted any, because corporate is sending a trash truck to get them as they have no more refrigerated trucks available that could get there before the 2-hour mark, at which they have to be trashed. We all took a few except this guy. He said, "Yo my man, is they free?" Was told yes, and said okay, and carried shirtful by shirtful to a cooler, putting them and then more inside, I assume to his fried. He put ice in the cooler, then went back to the truck driver to play chess, cards, and talk to him while holding a small trash can. They talked for over 5 hours before the trash truck got there. The whole time he drank milk after mini milk after mini milk, filling up the can with empties. He worked his way through a full crate of whole milk. When the guy left, he went inside and threw more ice into his cooler. Later that night he was outside drinking a milk. My dad was trying to get into knife throwing. One of my younger brothers grabbed a throwing knife and throws it at another younger sibling. My dad reaches out and grabs the knife, point first, before it does any damage. He was barely cut due to the thick calluses from his job. I was only 12 at the time, and I was really impressed about how good his reflexes were. I worked at McDonald's for a summer with this tiny old Asian guy named Panaya. He had 3 jobs and spoke very little English. Every now and then, I would spend $100 to pay for 100 ice cream cones, then say ice cream free today, and let kids get ice cream without paying for it. He also exemplified the old Asian kung fu master stereotype and did backflips in the store lobby, which was pretty cool. In New Zealand, after the Christchurch earthquake a few years ago, there was random footage of people helping at collapsed buildings, etc. In the background of one shot, clearly not really noticed by anyone at the time, was a dude picking up massive chunks of concrete walls/building and was just tossing it out of the way like it was made of paper. The country as a whole nicknamed him Incredibro Hulk. His response, once media figured out who he was that the weight of what he was grabbing hadn't even occurred to him. He just knew there were potentially still people alive under it, so it had to go. When I was in college, all students in our city used to go party in the same street that's filled with bars. In that street there's also a fry shop, where the owner would take like 10 to 15 people's orders at the same time without writing them down, and he'd never mess up an order. He was a living legend, and I've never met a person who studied in this city that didn't eat at that place. Like it would be 4 AM and there would be lines of drunk students out the door, and not once have I seen or heard of an order being messed up while nothing gets written down. It's insane. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. His son took over the business and shares the same talent. I had a professor who learned the names of every single student in all of his classes, some of which had 300 plus in a lecture, and a little bit about each of them. He could go up to anyone who had been in his class in the past few years and have a relevant conversation about their interests and what was going on in their lives. To be fair, he had a great system in place to allow him to do this. He took photos of each student with their names and memorized them on flashcards. And he had a ton of student aides who each got assigned a subset of the students to get to know much better and talk about at the student aid meetings. And he assigned a lot of meaningful personal assignments, asked students to talk about how the subject applied to their lives in class, and held fun extracurricular events for extra credit. But still, going to all that trouble, care about and really get to know every single student was pretty superhumanly awesome, if you ask me. He absolutely changed my life. In high school, my marching band director could control the weather. We lived in the rainy south near the coast, where summer storms were common. It never rained during practice. All 4 years of high school. The one time it did, the director threw his little clipboard on the ground and just stared up at the sky, and it just stopped. He was a strange man. Watched a friend of mine get kicked in his junk with enough force to make Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like a joke while in a heated argument with some girl. He just took and continued arguing like this attempt to ruin his day did nothing to him at all. When I was a 6th grader, I rode the bus home. Halfway through the route, the bus would pick up kids from another school. These kids would often encourage the bus driver to speed over dips and bumps as it would launch the kids a few inches in the air. She never did it until one time, when she took a bump at 45 miles per hour. Kids hit the luggage racks, flew across seats, and the emergency door at the back flew open, and this 10-year-old kid fell out of the bus. Now the bus was slowing down at this point, but still traveling fairly quickly, and this kid rolled back to his feet in one fluid motion, sprinted up to the bus, and leapt the 5 or so feet back through the doorway like he wasn't forcibly ejected from a moving vehicle. My husband lifted the front of a VW car off of a child who had been hit and had his neck under the front wheel. This saved his life, and he was awarded by the police and our city. My dad was really smart with math. Every time I asked about an equation or formulas, he would always know in a second what to do. He helped me to understand math and how to use it. Later on, I asked him why didn't he become a math professor. It was because he had PTSD and didn't want to affect the school children with his traumatic backslashes and see him sad. Sadly, he passed away in 2018 of a heart attack at the age of 50. I was working in a clinic and a mum brought in a floppy blue newborn baby. The doctor on duty was a man who stands 6 feet 6 inches. We put the baby on a trolley and the doctor undressed the baby and lay his hand on the baby's body. The doctor's hand pretty much covered baby's whole body. The doctor then directed me and 2 other nurses as to what he wanted us to do. He was so calm and so clear, and he saved that baby's life. The baby had pneumonia and hypothermia. Baby spent 2 weeks in ICU. I only worked with him for a short while and never really told him how awesome he was saving that baby. I know that's what doctors are supposed to do, but he did it so well and so gracefully. My granddad. I know everyone thinks their family is a bit like this when they're a kid, but he's slightly different. For context, he is a slight 5'4" average man, retired to a warm country nearby, usually 30 to 35 C in summer, and in all these stories is between 72, 77 yo. I once turned up at the airport to see him, and grandma picked me up as he was busy. Turns out busy was that he looped rope around the chimney stack, 2-story house, and was hanging out of another loop almost upside down, painting the house with no visible way of having got up there, except climbing the rope from the roof. My gran took me to the supermarket, and when we got back he was 35 feet up in a pine tree sawing a branch that was getting in the way of his view of the green on the golf course next to us. He was stood on the branch he was sawing. Me and him went to the hardware store, and on the way home he became convinced that the suspension in his 90s Toyota was squeaking. I do car stuff too, and couldn't hear it. In the time I took to go round the house and get into my swimming trunks, he'd got the car up on a jack and axle stands, dropped the whole rear axle off the car, dismantled one of the hubs, and was sat on a tire inspecting a bush. He asked me to dig a short trench for some lemon trees. Due to the hard volcanic soil and the 35°C plus heat at 11 AM, after 2 hours I gave up and went for an ice cream, planning to try again at 3 PM. I came back at 2 PM and he'd finished it himself. I'd not even got 1/3 of the way through. I once came back from the beach and found him balanced on one leg on the top step of a ladder under the eaves of the house. In one hand he had a full-size workshop air compressor, the big on wheels kind, and the other hand was spraying under the roof tiles. He was coughing furiously. I went inside and asked my grandma what was going on. She told me he'd filled the air compressor with a weak chlorine he'd made from pool supplies and was trying to smoke out some bats. I went back out and could see the bats were just staring back at him. He gave up soon after. I could barely lift the compressor on the ground. When I was learning to play ice hockey as a child, we had the usual kid who thought he was hot, but not nearly as skilled as he thought. Fast as hell, but no accuracy whatsoever. Still better than I ever was though. We practiced at the local rink, so it didn't have plexi above the walls, and one day this kid has a moment where he decides to try a slap shot. Puck completely goes off course and headed toward the stands, and one of the coaches just skates by and plucks it out of the air, throws it back on the ice and shakes his hand looking mildly uncomfortable, before skating up to the kid and sending him to the box for being a moron. Thought of him as Coach Spider-Man forever after that. A welterweight Cambodian in an exhibition plus gambling MMA match about 9 years ago. Cambodian whose parents had to deal with the Khmer Rouge. Bore the scars of that. His whole fam was super poor. Dude was completely illiterate, mathematically and language, but oh sweet Christ could he fight. I've watched him fight 4 times, but the one etched into my memory is one with this opponent, an Aussie stand-up fighter. Roided up 5'8" to 5'9" dude. Aussie lead with a left jab uppercut feint, and then a hard right hook. Cambodian broke the fist of the jab with his own left horizontal elbow, and moved inside the Aussie's hook for a right hook of his own. Whole fight was maybe 3 seconds. Aussie guy was knocked cold and his left hand was super broken. Anyone here who's boxed or done some serious competition knows that kind of bullshit belongs in the Matrix. I will never unsee that.